I want to know what y'all are saying. So we're here to talk about both this book, Embodied Healing, right here, that Nicole wrote a beautiful chapter for. And I wanted to just sort of introduce myself, and she can introduce herself. So I am Jenn Turner. I'm the co-director and co-founder of the Center for Trauma and Embodiment, editor of this book, and was so lucky to work with Nicole for years, but have been able to collaborate with Nicole in this process too. So Nicole, can you just share a little bit about yourself as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Jen said, I'm Nicole Faulknor. I'm founder of Wounds to Wings out here locally in Ontario. I'm like an hour outside the GTA. I'm also a registered psychotherapist, child and youth counselor, and I do a lot of work. I call it like within the cracks of the system, like where there's a space where people meet system. I really do a lot of mental health work and outreach work in those spaces, and all that I do around mental health and therapy and all the things. So yeah, that's who I am.
So, you know, the reason that we wanted to do this book to begin with is because a lot of the writing that's out there and a lot of the information that's out there around trauma and the body and the ways that trauma shows up in the body is really focused around research, neuroscience, and doesn't tend to kind of honor and prioritize the voice of the survivor, the person who's experienced the trauma. But also that, you know, again, we know so much around well, I guess I'll leave it at that. And so this is really, you know, part of the project of this was really to prioritize the wisdom and knowledge that folks have that are living through this experience and healing with this experience. And what we also know is that so much of, right, like the healing that is offered in the Western world and in the medical model is around sort of this like cognitive framework that we could use our brains and we can use our thoughts to change our bodies. But what we actually know is that doesn't actually work very well, particularly with experiences of trauma that are often wordless, that are so body oriented in nature and live in parts of our brain and our body that are not where language lives. And so, you know, our project at the Center for Trauma and Embodiment in general is focusing around developing models and approaches for trauma healing using the body first and using sort of body forward interventions, which is what we do with trauma sensitive yoga. And so one of the things that I was hoping we could do is read a little bit. I was reading some quotes from your chapter, but I don't know if you had some as well.
Yes, I did.
But I was really interested to hear a little bit just even about kind of your embodied experience. And so I have this kind of quote that I could read, or if you wanted to, I was hoping we could look at it on 168. Yeah.
I got it. Yep.
Awesome.
So on 168, go ahead.
Yeah, as I began sitting. Do you want to read it?
Sure, I can read it if you, yep.
Yeah.
As I begin sitting and listening to every sensation on my body, a fluttering around my chest, the pain in my left shoulder, the tightness around my throat, and difficulty in swallowing with use of my throat muscles, particularly around my voice box, I am brought to an emptiness, a void-like sensation in the pit of my stomach. The feeling as though I have been robbed and held for ransom while tortured in the very hands that were to love, clothe, feed, and protect me.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, you know, can you talk a little bit about what it was like for you, even, you know, just to begin to turn inward toward your body and begin to notice this?
Yeah, I can do that. I think how you began to like introduce the book is like a really good segue around like, well, for in two ways. One is being a practitioner, and the other is being a survivor. And I think that as both, we can really intellectualize and learn a lot of things, read a lot of things. And, you know, until I was really delving into the book, you know, I thought like, is that a survival mechanism? Like, is that what keeps me away from my body or avoids me to reconnect to my body? Like always learning and understanding things. but what is it like to feel my body and understand my body and then teach from there? So I'll say that doing this book, I kind of tapped into feelings of my own helplessness and I became more and more curious about what that was about. And it began to integrate my learnings and understanding myself as a survivor, from myself to myself, which kept me embodied, if that makes any sense yet to anyone. But yeah, I'll say that. It also, writing this chapter, like, surprisingly connected me actually to my racial heritage. Because the other thing about, like, understanding my body was, like, how detached I am from my body. Like, it's almost like I observe my body from the outside and I'm like talking to it and doing the thing. But like, I didn't really identify and understand what being a Black body meant to me. And so part of the chapter when I'm writing about it is actually my experience through some of the trauma yoga, trauma center, trauma sensitive yoga facilitation. Because prior to being a facilitator, I was doing this for a good couple years before. And I kind of got connected to it because I was surprised how, how detached I was from myself. And I noticed it a lot through thought sensations. That's what I called it. I started saying, like, I'd come into a space and then my thought sensations would be like, I'd be thinking it. Thought sensations are like, you begin to think something like, why is she looking at me like that? Like, why is her tone like this? Like, and those thought sensations that I had internally became things on my body. Like, my body would physically feel like disgusting. I'd be like, oh, okay, so I'm dealing with disgust. Okay, I don't know what that's about. So it allowed me to, like, even get behind sensations in my body, to stay in my body, to understand what was happening or be curious about it. I don't even think I finished that process. I think it's like an ongoing thing that we do. I don't know, I do. So I'll say that, like, speaking about my helplessness. Now, this part I'm saying about being robbed and, like, this feeling around my voice box, like, I often, through readings and being a practitioner, understand that I deal with relational injuries. Now, one of the things with my body, being a racialized body, is I have to become familiar with what this feeling is too, and be curious to, like, all the way back, like, be curious about my history. In the chapter I talked about, maybe it's part of my childhood trauma, maybe, because I suffered every type of abuse as a child. And so maybe it is, and maybe it's about the migration of my racial heritage and the torture, maybe the shackles, I don't know, around my neck, and, like, not being able to speak, or the fear and stuff like that, right? So long story short, because I probably kept going on, it's saying that I actually became more and more curious around the helplessness on my body and what that meant for me. Okay, so.
And then when you talk about the helplessness, can you kind of dive a little bit more deeply into that, in that curiosity or that exploration?
Yeah. Okay, so helplessness, on my body's curiosity goes, I think that my body, from my childhood trauma, has a history of helplessness. It does. Like, you know, like, even today, like, we're moving around with, like, technology and stuff like that. And I have this body awareness that I can either move into the helplessness of doing that or be in my body and just wait. Right? So this awareness of, like, what happens with my body when it's helpless allows me the power to choose what I do in this feeling when it's happening. And so, yeah, we were moving around a bit, but I was okay. I was just grounded and waiting. Myself before, several years ago, maybe no, right? My heart would be racing. I was sweating. There would be a fear of punishment. You know, this is myself now talking to myself then, that I wasn't aware of, that would bring my body into a panic. Okay. And so that's a history of helplessness on my body's story to my childhood trauma. Now, when I speak about my helplessness on my body as a racialized body that's been displaced, so I'll never have a home, because part of my migration in my racial heritage is that we were taken away from what we have home. So some people say, oh, I'll go back home, you know, from Somalia, so I can go back there. They actually were born and raised there, like, you know, and they've come here, so they actually have a place to go. Or maybe they're from Netherlands, you know, they have a place to go back to. But because of how the history of my racial heritage story started, I don't have a place to return to. And so it creates a displacement in my body, like a void, like when I'm working with it, you see. And so I have to become curious about my story and continue to educate myself about my story. Because if I'm honest with myself, and now I'm honest live, like I didn't really think about it actually until a few years ago, and I'm in my years, like you know, and so that alone has given me a lot of historical reference so that I can begin to create a placement of home and what that means. Like, again, I can go back to this story about just being curious around this feeling in my neck and feeling robbed. It could go back to feeling kidnapped and confined. And now that we've discovered freedom, what is freedom? Like, and how are these things reenacted again from my body to whatever is happening here, like in society or whatever, you know? So I could go on and on.
No, I love it. And let's do it. And one thing I'm wondering about, and I think you kind of give a nod to this just briefly in your chapter, but like, what is it like also to heal from trauma when it is ongoing? And so, you know, you're talking about like captivity and forced migration, enslavement, you know, but then I think about now in the ways that there is this kind of captivity in a way, you know, there is this lack of safety, you know, it's like, you know, so how do we, you know, how do you experience that today when you're also healing from this historical piece, but it's alive, maybe when you step outside into the world?
That's a really big, like a big, not idea, it's a big curiosity to have. And I really like it because like, I like to purse things, like I move things away and like kind of look at it like, yeah, that's interesting. And this is interesting. And that there, because I feel when it is ongoing, I feel that, and I can only speak about my African-American heritage on my body, okay? And there are other races who have been displaced too, like indigenous and so forth, like that may have similar, but I can only speak for myself. And so I'm gonna do that. So I'll say that as a result of this ongoing invisible psychological enslavement, let's say that, I think what has happened because of that is that we might still be living from our traumatized parts of ourself or trauma response, which means that our body is staying active always. It is always in a stress response because it's in a survival response, be it a fight, a flight, a freeze, an attach, a submit. Any of those, I think we continue to live from there because of the displacement, which means that these behaviors that are societally being spoken about, like the angry Black woman, or like however we attach these things to it, I actually think these are responses that are mischaracterized as our identity, our cultural identity, perhaps. And I think that we got to do the work from within all of us, because one of the things I was doing a webinar or whatever and started talking, and I saw myself like traveling to a whole different topic, but what came from that is that a lot of times in the community, when I go to the community, everyone's kind of doing their work around this racialized things because it has really become something like be it the pandemic and everybody's still in listening or observing and now feeling or they're feeling for themselves being like confined in the pandemic. And so the ability to feel for others, I don't know, but whatever it is, this attention is here, you know, and it means that I have to be conscious of not doing this type of racialized healing work out of this trauma response. And if I don't know what that is, then I may not be suitable to do the work, because it'll mirror back this re-traumatizing thing back and forth with bodies that don't identify as racialized, bodies that do. Do you see? Because we're either, I think, see this, we're gonna go, we might be, okay, thank you. I think that what's happening, because it's ongoing, is that we're just living from these feelings of shame, guilt, or fear. I think it just continues because these are embodied feelings. Okay, so our bodies are just living out this fear, shame, or guilt. So it means that if your body is a body that identifies as a white body, and my body identifies as a Black body, and you feel guilty, and I feel fearful, our bodies are replaying something together. Okay, so it means that we have to actually sit in our bodies and do the work, because what we once feared as a child, we hate. What we fear becomes our hate. I feel that in a way, which means, I know we were like having this like conversation the other day, but you know, I said like my dog actually tippy toes around me, like, cause I fear loud noises. It's just a thing, right? So like all of a sudden now I have this like 2.5-year-old dog who knows my way, that if my back is turned, like he's even in the room, like he's not gonna make like big movements. I hate it. Like stop. I'll be like really like, you know, I hate it. And I think that we have to work with what we fear, because it becomes hate. We have to work with our shame, because it actually keeps us quiet. And we have to work with our guilt, because there's a sense of responsibility that's attached. Okay. And so we all have to do our work from within. So we're not mirroring back these injuries on each other. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that comes to mind even.
Right. I mean, that is brilliant, I think. And I think that is right. That's just, it's like it's another way of understanding how, you know, I think about all the time, like I have to do my work so I can show up. But what you're saying, right, it's like, what am I embodying when I'm showing up? If I'm embodying guilt, or if I'm, you know, like I mentioned on the failed earlier call, that like, you know, I feel permission to be in the world, to take up space because of my racialized body, because of my white body, right? And I feel permission to go in different spaces and places, and what does that mean? And what does that mean in terms of how I show up, and who am I crowding out by taking so much space as well? And how is my body creating less space potentially for someone else's body?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly that. And if we're talking about relational injuries, you see, Jen, like say your body feels guilty, for example, and my body has this invisible, and I keep going to go back to this part of the chapter because we kind of brought it in, but like say this relational injury of mine is around my throat. So if you actually could see it, you'd see that there are scar marks around my throat. It's burnt, it's scarred tissue. Do you see? Now I'm injured. You would physically see that. But because the type of relational injury I'm talking about, it's invisible, so you can't see it. But if you could see it and you see me coming up towards you and you want to help me, but you feel guilty for some reason. Remember, we connect by limbic to limbic. Like I feel you without you speaking. So if you're not embodied and aware, and I feel you, and this injury around my neck, you feel guilty some way. You don't know what or how, but you do. My body's going to pick up and be like, don't come near me. I'm already injured, and I can feel, and I can feel your guilt that you're probably responsible. I'm not going to want my body to be served by, like helped by you, regardless if you're the nurse that's going to help my neck or not. Do you see? Because it's felt. So I think when I say do the work from within, it means that it's about then, say, for example, that guilt, work through the guilt, which is, why do I feel responsible for that? And what is that narrative tied to? Because if it could be repressed, that it's not connected to you. And so the work is to connect to it so that you can sit with that narrative and say, oh, that was my uncle. I feel responsible for my uncle because he was quite rude or he was maybe perhaps, I don't know, like racist. I don't know, talking about race. But
or even if I zero in on my own personal responsibility, right? It's like, okay, yeah, I'm someone who maybe studying and learning about things, but what are ways that I am also perpetuating systems of oppression and harm? And how is it that in the moment that that guilt comes up, because I'm like, okay, how am I how am I participating and forwarding this system? Which of course, you know, that is part of the project I feel like that I have undertaken is like, it's not enough just to be studying and learning and talking about it. It's like, now what?
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah. And the historical piece too, right? The shame that I might bear from things that people have said that in my family, or the things that I might have learned. That's, yeah.
Yeah. And,
powerful.
you know, we can simplify it because I think because these are such big constructs, it gets complicated. But I sometimes wonder if we could simplify things, like, say that was a feeling that came up and like you came to me with guilt and I had this relational injury around my neck and you're wanting to take care of it. What if it was just understanding your guilt and saying, what do you need me to do? Or I have a sense of guilt for something. I don't know why. So you maybe tell me, like, allow me to empower and say, oh, I need you to walk slower, or I need you to do this. It then empowers the other person without actually having to know all about me, because I'm actually able to then articulate from here. You see? So it's like a power to choose almost.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you're authentically, like, it's a shared experience really, because you get to show up authentically, which makes me show up authentically naturally, especially if we connect limbic to limbic, right? Because it's saying, oh, she doesn't know, she's kind of scared. I understand scared. And that is a universal language. Emotions are. It doesn't matter where we are in the world. That's an emotional language. So you're scared is, I understand scared. And I can say, oh, okay. Well, can we do this then? You see? So, yeah.
Right. And one of the things I think also that we were talking about as well, and even now in this moment, we're sort of talking about the sense of like, what are the spaces where you can be mirrored in a way as opposed to reenacted, right? Because I think what you're talking about, at least to my ears, is like, how are we reenacting this sort of dynamic if we're not doing our work? But if we are doing our work, or if we're in different spaces, you know, what is it like to have a space where you can be actually mirrored? And I don't know if you were thinking also just different spaces that, well, I don't know. I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, okay. But it brings in what I was sharing before about, like, I remember my body going into a yoga studio and my body does not look like anybody else's body, or anything. And so, you know, it comes with being a racialized body, which means that you don't see other bodies around that are similar. So it continues the shame. And when I educate about shame, I share shame because in Latin, it means to cover. That's what shame means. And so anytime I work with trauma, I know I comfort shame first, because the shame's going to cover all the trauma. And so just being in my Black body, it feels shameful. Do you see? I think that some of the work, and I'm not going to get clinical and talk about like neuroplasticity and all these blah, 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 because I'm not an expert, I don't know. But what I do know is that in some of the work that I've observed, and even through watching like documentaries and stuff like that, you know, when they work with these types of mirroring things, it means, well, I'll just bring in this documentary. So I watch lots, okay, of documentaries, probably annoying to friends and stuff, because I'll like bring up ideas and all these things. But there was a documentary called like Stressed. And anyways, long story short of it, there's a technique called neuroemotive technique or whatever. But what they were sharing there that sounded very important is that this veteran who lost his limb, he was having a difficult time with phantom pains and like this physical pain in his body from this emotional turmoil that he went through, war, and then losing his leg and all these things. And so one of the things they did was they, as part of his therapy, they took a mirror and then they put it beside his other leg and it mirrored off the other leg. And so he started firing off differently, like even emotionally, like all of these things. So his brain fired differently because he thought the leg was there. And so then he was able to go into his work with the emotional narrative, and like, you know, all these things. Okay. So what I'm saying for my body is that like, there may not be a lot of spaces where we get to have our bodies mirrored back. And so we might be staying within our shame, or disintegrated, or like detached from our body, like put our bodies over there. I don't want anything to do with it. And so we might need more spaces where our bodies can be mirrored so that we can also fire off differently to begin our healing, because we may not have had a chance yet. Talk about ongoing. We may not have had a chance yet to actually heal. And we may still be in all of our traumatized parts of ourselves, which are these survival responses. And it's not who we are. So we need spaces where we can be mirrored. And so we can do our work and do our, the clinical things and all the things, but reintegrate is what I'm saying to our bodies.
Right. I love that. And that description of that paints such a vivid picture of, exactly, what you're describing. And then, thinking about, again, this sense of it, maybe we can even define a little bit this like racialized body and what it means to be racialized. Something that I thought a lot about with colleagues is how, for so long, I didn't even consider myself racialized because I just was, right? That is privilege, right? Right there. It's like, not having to think about your race, not having to think about your identity, is because it is privileged. But then to think about how your body is the site of that racialization, and all that comes with that. I'd really encourage people, anyone who's listening or watching, it's like to investigate all of the things that we have learned to be true in so many different ways. That the rules of the system that we operate in about what our bodies are and are not able to do, how we get to show up or don't get to show up based on these systems of oppression. And so, I think sometimes, much like just racism in general, that it is something that white people need to, and I think hopefully, but that need to take more ownership of also the ways that we too are both harmed by this and participate in it. And, this is why I'm so glad we're having this conversation today. So, we're over time anyway. Yes, some people asking for copies of the book. We'll post some links if we can on the book in the chat once we're done in the comments. So is there anything else that we want to talk about that we didn't get to in our, one thing, we were also just talking a bit about was this kind of extrareceptive vigilance. I'm not sure if it fits in now or if we're sort of like off somewhere else, but when you describe kind of even going into a space where if you're the only Black body that is there, is that a reenactment in a way too of that extrareceptive vigilance? Because finding, where you fit or belong or can situate yourself in this space where there's not other bodies that are mirroring you, where, it's a curiosity, I guess.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, too. What I'm saying too, is that, that alone, I can just only go into an embodied image. It's I have this really imaginative mind. I don't know, but to connect to what you're saying in an image, I'm for example, my body being a Black body going into space like that, if I close my eyes and the education I've done around our racial heritage, that alone, with my body being there, the visceral effect of that might be the, walking up to, a platform where you're going to be auctioned or you're being looked at, or, your body has been raped and used for our bodies have been exploited. And so the shame can come in before me, my body story, the epigenetics, the DNA, can be feeding my body the story before they're just showing up in a space and being the only Black body. Do you see what I mean? And so it's the places where we can then work with that type of embodiment, because we have to keep in mind this visceral reaction of shame or fear, because I can then go in that space and be I hate this studio. Do I hate it or do I fear it? Does it remind, it is about understanding that these feelings on our bodies are embodied. It means it's physically with me. When I walk my body out of that studio, I walk my shame out on my body with it. And it will trigger for a week saying I might feel really low. Just like it might be turned into self-hate. You know, if you want me to just keep going, because a form of trauma response that we may not talk about a lot is self-hate. And it's, instead of like hating the trauma, you begin to internalize and hate yourself. It's a trauma response. And so, you know, I call it the resilience and repression. So because my body knows how to move on and go, okay, well, I hate this space, I'm going back there. I'm going to find a better space. And that resilience comes with repression. It's saying, just push it away and like, go, you see? But the work is to like stay in the space and like learn to articulate how my body can feel better in that space. So, you know, my body naturally goes quiet. I have a story around here, like I've lost my voice, I've reclaimed my voice, but I have to work with all the visceral feelings that come up with me and then learn to articulate it. So I have to say, oh, my body feels helpless right now because there's a bit of tech things. What do I need? I feel helpless. I need to breathe in my body. I need to, like, you know, I need to read while we figure this out. I need to, right? So I empower myself by choosing, once I know what I'm feeling, you see? And so in that space, I might say, what are your thoughts on perhaps having someone who's racialized, or like, or I don't know, like, can I stay in the back and not use this? Like, to be honest, I don't know if my body now would go in a space where I didn't feel free, to be honest. Like, as soon as there's a studio and they're like, oh, do this, and I say, did they just tell me what to do? I'm ready, like, in a, like, if I'm a trigger response, like, no, not this body. Like, I'm
right.
Right.
Well, and you know, it's really helpful for you as, like, you know, when you were giving the example earlier and talking about someone with their throat, and if I came up, like, with the ways we would mirror each other in a, like, in a reenactment kind of way, I didn't quite viscerally feel that in my body, but I just felt when you were describing coming into a yoga space, and like, and then I felt the guilt that I would feel being in a, you know, if it's like an all kind of white space, and then there is one body that is not, and then that shame and guilt that I would feel. And I viscerally just like got that, you know, and it landed. And thinking about, especially when if we're practicing side by side one another, how much you sense the person that is next to you, you know, I mean, like you said, we are limbic to limbic, and what my breath is doing, and how that then makes you also, you know, kind of retract or retreat or feel unwelcome or be unsafe. It's really profound. I think I just got it the second time around there.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Yeah.
Yeah. But, and I also love hearing this piece about, right, like the freedom, you know, and I think that I resonate with that as well, just from this work of kind of embodied healing and carrying my own history and trauma in my body. It's like, yeah, now that I've been given the like the ticket or the pass to be able to be free in my body, it's like, there is no way. Right. You know, and I think it's important for us to name all those layers. I'm aware that we're over our time because we started late, and so, and you may have commitments and things to do, but I'm so grateful for you to be here and to talk with us about this. Anything last that you want to add in there that you didn't get a chance to say, or we could just keep riffing and we'd probably go on forever.
We're good at that, right? Just riffing.
Yep.
We are. You know, I will probably, one more thing I'll say too, and it's like what I kind of work with this when I'm in the community and working with, we call it like unconscious biases, leadership teams and like agencies and stuff. And one of the reflective things I usually work with, like closer to the end, so it's more reflective, because I really feel like we can share a lot, but like, I think it just even happened here. Like, it is about your reflective capacity to connect to yourself. Do you see where it builds a connection? Because now your body going into space is going to notice like a racialized body that comes in, and you'll have this feeling that you remembered in your body, like, you know, and it'll allow this different type of offering, right, in the room. But I usually ask, like in these types of workshops, what do you feel about your vulnerability? So what do you feel about your vulnerability, insecurities, and inadequacies? Okay, it's lunchtime. Okay, inadequacies. When working with your bias, be a racial bias or unconscious bias, so that it doesn't define the both of us. You see? So everybody's like in their corner has to do their work, because if not, like it then defines a space between you and I.
Right, right.
So we have to kind of work with our vulnerabilities, our insecurities, our inadequacies in us. So we're not mirroring back, especially if we're in a role of a mirror in the community. Do you see?
Right.
So.
Well, and it's the same way I think about, like, you know, if we're holding space and I am taking up too much of the space, or what's between you and me is then you don't have the space to do your work, or I don't have the space to do my work. If we're not actually claiming it and containing it in that way.
Yeah.
And then there can't be that thing that is between us, which is what we want. It's like that sweet kind of spot where we get to then also have the relationship.
Right. Exactly. That's right.
That's really, I love that. Well, you have given us so much to think about. As usual, I'm just like, I'm percolating over here. Thank you so much for joining. And thanks everyone for giving a listen, and thanks for sharing the link, Stefan, for the book. Be well, and I hope to see you again soon, Nicole.
Yes, likewise, Jen. Pleasure as always.
Bye.
Bye.